welcome to Honey Brews Kombucha. I'm going to go over the process for making fruit-flavored kombucha that I've been using for the past couple of years with great success. I learned how to do it from watching YouTube videos just like you are, and I encourage you to take a look at as many as you can and sort of glean from each the information that you think suits you best, which is what I did. So I'm just going to be talking about the process that I use. There are supplies that you need to get ahead of time before you get started, and I've made a list of those, and I will hold those up at the very end so that you can either pause the video or do a screenshot and see. It takes about a week to brew your fermented tea. And so from the day you start, it'll be a week before you can start bottling. So my tea is already brewed, so I'll take you through the whole process and show you how that works. The first thing I want to tell you is that everything needs to be scrupulously clean. I scrub my hands, I take off rings, I clean my sink really well. I clean the pots and the bottles and the measuring cups that I'm going to be using really, really well. And then I rinse them with just white distilled vinegar. It's inexpensive. It's a good neutralizing cleaner. So that's what works for me. I think there are some commercial brands, things that you can buy to clean your bottles. And I have had good success using vinegar, so I commend it to you. You'll need to get some flip-top bottles that look like this, and there are many options. Look under beer brewing or kombucha brewing supplies online. And these are 16-ounce bottles, and they have the wire bail top so that they make a good seal so that you can carbonate your kombucha when you're ready for that. You'll need a funnel and plastic or silicone, either one. If you happen to have one in your kitchen, it probably works fine. So I wash all my bottles in the dishwasher so they're sterilized, but I'm usually not ready to bottle since I only bottle once a week. I'm usually not ready for them right out of the dishwasher. So what I do is I boil a kettle of water and fill all my bottles to sterilize them again, pour that out, and then I use the white vinegar that I've rinsed all of my measuring cups and everything I'm going to use in, and then rinse it out with clear water. So I pour my vinegar in each one of my flip-top bottles and give it a good swish, and then I pour it in the next bottle. And that way I know that all my bottles are scrupulously clean. One thing that I learned after I got started was that when you brew your tea and the fruit flavoring, they have to be cool before you can start adding it to your fermented tea. And so what I usually do is boil the water for the tea early in the morning and start the fruit that I'm going to flavor it with, so that by the time I'm ready to bottle in the afternoon, they're cool and I can get started on that. So the way it works is you're going to need a SCOBY, and I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. It stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast, SCOBY, and it's a very weird looking thing. And I'm going to take off, this is an old linen napkin that I use to cover my jar, since you want it to have some air circulation, but you don't want any insects to be able to get in there. And I found out that an old linen napkin has a pretty tight weave, and I can secure it on the top with rubber bands. So I'm going to have a measuring cup that I've already rinsed with vinegar, so it's clean. And I'm going to reach in with my really clean hand and pull out the SCOBY. And it looks kind of like, it's really hard to describe. It's kind of a gooey, rubbery pancake. And what happens is the SCOBYs multiply. They make babies, SCOBYs, multiply over the time that your tea is fermenting. And so every week you'll make a new baby SCOBY. And I started out saving these in a jar with a little bit of the fermented tea, but I really, in case one of my SCOBYs went bad, and you'll read about, you know, people worried that their SCOBY's gotten moldy or whatever. They sometimes will have a little bit of yeast on them, but you can kind of tell if you've got a healthy SCOBY. So I'll probably save both of these, but usually what I do, because sometimes I produce, oh, there is another one in the bottom. Yeah. And so I'll probably throw one away because you really only need one SCOBY. Let's grease it out a little bit. And you want to save some of this fermented tea, which is just black tea and sugar with a SCOBY added to it with a little bit of starter. You want to pour about a cup or a cup and a half of that and set that aside with your SCOBY, because that's what's going to start your next batch. I use what's called a continuous brew method, which means I've always got a jar fermenting so that each week I make a new batch. So this is from, I set this up last Tuesday, and it takes about 7 days to ferment. And I keep it under my sink in the bathroom in the closed cabinet, and so that it's in a dark place where it's not going to be disturbed. And you can taste it to make sure that it's fermented, but you don't want it to sit so long that it goes to vinegar, which happens after 7 or 8 days or so. So plan out your bottling so that you know you'll be available to work on it 7 days from when you put your tea and SCOBY in the jar. So that is my fermented tea ready to bottle up. I've taken out my SCOBY and a cup and a half of fermented tea to start my next batch. So I've made the flavoring that I'm going to use, and there are lots of kinds of fruits you can use. Frozen blueberries or any berries are the easiest for me to use. This time I had a bag of frozen mixed berries, so I've got some blackberries and raspberries in there. Any kind of berry works fine. Cherries work. If you have fresh peaches or plums or apricots, those work great too. It's just nice to be able to have frozen fruit on hand, and the prep is a little bit easier. You start with a cup of water, and I use, again, filtered water from the Brita. A cup of water, 2 tablespoons of sugar, which helps with the fermenting, and a cup of fruit. And you simmer it on the stove. I leave it about the same length of time I'm brewing my tea, so 20 or 30 minutes. And then you let it sit and cool. And you don't have to do this process, but I think it makes it easier to drink if you pour it through a strainer and get out the solids, because I like to put mint in mine. I also use about a tablespoon of bottled ginger, because I really like ginger. And I've had to kind of experiment to see how much ginger. It's hard to see what I'm doing, but I'm straining the fruit into my clean, another clean measuring cup. So you kind of squish it. Sometimes I do this earlier in the day and just let it sit. And I have in the past made up my fruit and tea and run out of time to do the bottling, and I've put them in, I've sterilized some jars and just put them in the refrigerator covered until I can bottle it up the next day, and that's worked out fine. I don't typically do that. So I'm straining out all my, the juice out of the liquid, And as I said, I started out not doing this and putting all the fruit, just dumping it in with the tea, and then it's just a little bit more stuff in your bottle when you're trying to drink it. So I usually work on this a little bit longer. I have put it through cheesecloth before and just squeezed it out of the cheesecloth, but then you have to remember to keep cheesecloth, and I never can do that. So you have to scrape off from the bottom of the strainer. A pretty fine mesh strainer works really well. So there's my fruit ready to go in my jar of fermented tea. So I'm just gonna pour it in there. And now I'm gonna pour it back in the measuring cup to mix it up a little bit. And now my flavored fermented tea is ready to bottle. So I've poured vinegar in all of my bottles, and so I'm just going to rinse them out. And I'll use my funnel. I usually do this in the sink, but I'll try and do it where you can see it. It's not a complicated procedure. I pour the fruit-flavored fermented tea into a measuring cup, and then I pour it into the bottle, and it foams up pretty good, so you kind of want to watch it so that you don't overflow and waste your tea. And I usually fill it just about up to where the neck starts to curve in, because I want to leave enough room for it to carbonate. Now this is ready to drink. It's fermented. It tastes fine. It just tastes a lot better, I think, when it's carbonated and then chilled. So we're going to bottle these up, and then I like to keep mine in either in the box that the jars came in and the bottles came in, or a dish pan works fine too. I keep mine in the bathtub of our guest bedroom, because it's can be undisturbed, and it can also be in a place where should it explode, which apparently has happened to a number of people. It hasn't ever happened to me, but I figure, why take a chance? So I put it in the bathtub, put the bottles in the bathtub, and close the shower curtain. So in the unlikely event there should be an explosion, at least it won't be all over my bathroom. So that is my method. When I first started, I bought 6 of these bottles from a company called Bellman, and I really like them. They work great. But then I decided that maybe if more than just one person was drinking the kombucha, and it's 1 gallon after you take out the 1.5 cups you need to start your next batch. 1 gallon makes 6 or 7 bottles, because I don't fill them up with the exact amount, so it's probably 14 to 16 ounces in each. So you get 6 or 7 bottles from each gallon of fermented tea, and so I thought it might be a good idea to get another set of bottles, and so I got another batch, and I got another jug. It was just the only thing I could find was a sun tea jug, and it held more than a gallon. Well, what I discovered was that it was kind of a lot of trouble to keep up with 2 different brewing schedules in 1 week. So after a few times of trying that, it was nice to have a lot of kombucha on hand. My grandchildren love kombucha, and it does contain some alcohol. You can do research and find out. It's just a trace amount, and I think there are a lot of variables that determine just how much alcohol each bottle has. But it's a negligible amount, I think. So it looks like today I have a little more than 7 bottles, and I don't want to fill them too full. So you can just set this aside and put it in a jar and chill it and drink it, or whatever you want to do with it. So there is my bottled up fruited kombucha, and I'll just tighten the cap on each one, and I like to rinse them off so they won't be sticky. And I'll show you now how to start out a new batch with the sweet tea that I've got ready to go. So I've got my gallon jar here that I put fruit juice in, so I want to give it a good clean before I put some more, start a new batch in it. So I'm going to fill it with hot water and a lot of soap, and I'm going to use my hand to clean it rather than using a dish brush or a cloth or anything. So you want to scrub the inside of it with your hand really carefully so that there's no residue from the last batch. And what I do when I brew my tea is that I fill my biggest saucepan with filtered water, and I let it come to a rolling boil. That's hard to say. A rolling boil, and then I pour in 1 cup of white sugar and stir that really well to dissolve it. And then you add 8 small tea bags. You don't want the big family size ones. I just get regular Lipton individual orange cocoa tea. Now you'll read some tutorials that start you out with organic sugar and organic tea and bottled water, which I did when I started. But it's really, organic sugar especially is a lot more expensive, and since my objective was to cut down the cost, I decided that was not worth it. So I'm just rinsing my gallon glass jar with a lot of water so that I know it's clean. And you don't have to dry it off. And I'm going to take my brewed tea made with 8 bags of tea and 8 tea bags and 1 cup of sugar that's cool to the touch, because if it's hot it'll ruin the SCOBY. And I'm going to pour it in my gallon jug. I haven't measured this because my gallon jug will do the measuring for me. After I've got my tea in there, I'm going to add my 1.5 cups of starter fermented tea from the last batch, and I'm going to go ahead and put both of the little SCOBYs in there. And now I'm going to top it off with filtered water from the Brita, and I don't want it to be so full that I have to worry about jostling it when I walk, because I'm going to put the napkin back on there with a couple of rubber bands to hold it securely, and then I'll walk it back under my in the cabinet under my sink to keep it. And then next Tuesday I'll start the whole process over again. These bottles will sit in the bathtub for 3 days. That's how long it takes to carbonate. You can drink it tomorrow. I wouldn't leave it much longer than 3 days because after 3 days, they're pretty carbonated. You put it in the refrigerator, and that stops the carbonating process, and then they're good for weeks. I have, on occasion, traveled with my bottled kombucha because it wasn't ready to put in the refrigerator, wasn't finished carbonating, and I didn't want to leave it if I was going out of town. So I have traveled with my kombucha waiting for it to carbonate. The thing you have to remember is that you can leave the tea for a few more days, but 7 is probably optimum. It takes a little bit longer in the winter sometimes if the temperature where you're storing it varies a lot. It ferments a little faster when it's warm. Our house is pretty temperature controlled, so a week is usually pretty good for me, either in the winter or summer. I did make some notes, and let's see. Let me show you the supply list, so you can either pause the video and get that written down, or you can do a screenshot. So you're going to need to find a supplier for your glass container, your flip-top bottles, and a funnel if you don't already have one. And then go to the store and get your jug of white vinegar. And I put down unflavored plain commercial kombucha. If when you buy a SCOBY, it doesn't come with at least a cup of fermented tea, your starter liquid, then you can just start with plain kombucha, and I have done that before. You can decide what fresh or frozen fruit, and play around with a lot of different things and see what you like. Some people put a raisin in the bottle of each bottle, and I used to be really careful when I started to make sure I had a couple of blueberries in the bottom of each bottle before I sealed it up, which is just intended to